The strait was supposed to breathe. Every 6 hours, the tide rolled in, pushing cool ocean water between the cliffs, refreshing the murky lagoon beyond. Then it slipped back out again, pulling silt and waste away into the open sea. The rhythm had been the same for as long as the dolphins remembered, steady, predictable, as natural as the moon's glow on calm water. But today, the tide did not come. A young bottlenose dolphin named Lyra glided through the strait, rising toward the surface with a soft puff of air. She expected to feel the pull of incoming water, the cool surge that brought fish and plankton, and 1,000 drifting scents. Instead, the sea was heavy, still, dense. The water pressed around her like thick soup, warm and unmoving. She flicked her tail harder, expecting the usual resistance, the helpful forward push that currents offered, but nothing pushed her, not forward, not backward. The strait lay flat, motionless. Lyra clicked experimentally, sending a burst of sound through the murky water. Her echolocation should have returned a clean map of the channel. Rock edges, drifting kelp, fish hiding in pockets of turbulence, but her call came back muddled, blurry, distorted. The water wasn't just still, it was thick with suspended silt. She swam closer to the channel floor. The sandbed was usually sculpted by the tide into long ripples, like a pattern etched by invisible fingers. Today it was smooth, featureless, coated in a heavy blanket of dark sediment. Lyra nudged it with her rostrum. It lifted sluggishly, as if glued to the ground. A bad sign. She rose again, surfacing among floating scraps of driftwood and seaweed patches that should have been swept away hours ago. The tide hadn't returned not because it was late, but because something blocked it. A vibration rolled faintly through the water. Lyra froze mid-swim. Not a whale, not a ship, not thunder. A deep tremor from the seafloor. She dove instinctively, her sleek body cutting through the murk. The tremor passed again, stronger this time. Tiny air bubbles drifted upward in odd spirals. A school of anchovies darted past her in panicked formation, scattering in frantic pulses. Their movement had no rhythm, just fear. Lyra turned toward the lagoon, hoping for clearer water, but the further she swam, the cloudier it became. Dark plumes rose from the bottom in slow fountains, like underwater dust storms. Her echolocation failed again. No clear returns, only a wall of haze. Something was stirring below. She circled back toward the strait entrance. That's when she noticed the boats. 3 human vessels hovered near the channel mouth. Research boats, painted white and yellow. Floodlights stabbed the dark water, beams wavering as they reflected off suspended mud. Scientists in orange vests leaned over sensors, their expressions tight and worried. One lowered a probe into the water, another stared at a screen. A third pointed helplessly toward the open sea. Their instruments beeped frantically, displaying readings Lyra couldn't understand, but she understood their fear. Something was blocking the tide from entering the strait. She dove deeper. Her sleek body slipped through the warm water as she searched for the missing surge. She expected the cool ocean water to greet her, rushing inward, but instead she found heat. A warm current flowing from the lagoon outward, as though the strait were exhaling instead of inhaling. That was wrong. Tides didn't reverse like that, not without storms, not without pressure changes, not without massive underwater shifts. Lyra turned toward the seafloor. A long line of disturbed sediment stretched across the bottom like a scar. Fresh, dark, unsettled. She followed it. The murky silt thickened. It rose in spirals, dancing in the faint light that filtered from the boats. Lyra clicked again. This time her echolocation returned something sharp. A wall, not natural, not part of the seafloor's usual shape. A deposit, enormous, constructed by pressure, not by creatures. A sediment dam. Her heart thudded. The seafloor had lifted, pushing mud into a ridge that blocked the incoming tide like a plug. Lyra swam along it, mapping its edges. The ridge stretched almost the entire width of the strait, broken only by a small gap where warm water leaked out. A geological shift. A landslide beneath the sea. A strange release of trapped silt from deeper layers. Whatever the cause, the effect was the same. No cool water would enter. The lagoon was cut off, and the tide could not return. Lyra surfaced again for air. Above her, the humans were frantic. One shouted into a radio. Pressure increase beneath the channel floor. Another yelled back, "The sedimentary plug is still rising. Look at the sonar." A third pointed at the water. Oxygen levels dropping fast in the lagoon, if the tide won't flush it. Lyra didn't understand their words, but she understood urgency, and she understood danger. The lagoon behind her was already changing. Fish moved sluggishly. Mangrove roots sagged in overheated brackish water. Crabs crawled onto rocks, seeking air. Birds circled overhead, confused. Lyra dove a final time. The ridge beneath the water was not stable. It pulsed, rising in slow increments. More silt poured from deep cracks. More mud stacked itself. More warmth leaked upward from disturbed layers. The sea was sealing the lagoon, turning it into a stagnant, overheated pool. Lyra swam toward the open ocean, trying to find a path for cooler water to slip through, but every path she checked narrowed beneath her fins. Sediment continued to rise like a slow avalanche. The Strait groaned again. A tremor. Longer this time, heavier. Lyra fled upward instinctively. The seafloor lifted another few centimeters, and the last gap in the sediment closed. The tide, the ancient breathing of this place, had been cut off completely. The sea would not return. Lyra hovered in place, lungs full of fresh air, staring down at the murky barrier sealing the water behind her. The lagoon was trapped. The heat would grow, the oxygen would fall, the fish would die, and the dolphin knew, from instinct older than memory, that the ocean had not stopped breathing. The Strait had simply lost its lungs. For a long moment, Lyra hovered above the sealed channel, staring down at the murky ridge that had risen from the seafloor. Her sleek grey body floated motionless except for the flick of her tail. Instinct screamed at her that water should not behave this way. Tides didn't simply stop. Currents didn't simply vanish. The heartbeat of the Strait had flatlined. She clicked softly into the water. Her echolocation struck the sediment wall and returned as a dull, thick thud. No give, no gaps, no tunnels, just packed silt. The Strait had become a closed room. Lyra dove down until her belly almost brushed the muddy surface. The heat radiating from it disturbed her. Warmth should come from the surface, not the bottom. But this heat came from below, rising through sediments that should have stayed buried for ages. She nudged the ridge with her rostrum. It didn't crumble, it just compacted further as if pressing itself tighter. The water tasted different too, not clean, not fresh, stale, like water left too long in a bucket under the sun. She flicked her tail sharply and sped toward the lagoon. As she swam, she felt the texture of the water change, heavier, more resistant, full of suspended particles. She rose for air near a mangrove fringe. What she saw unsettled her more. Small fish clustered thickly near the roots, gasping at the surface. A heron stood knee-deep in the lagoon, watching the fish with confusion instead of hunger. Crabs crawled out of the water entirely, leaving the mud behind. Lyra clicked. Her call echoed strangely, bouncing off layers of warm, stratified water. There were no currents left to carry sound. The lagoon was becoming stagnant. A second dolphin surfaced nearby, an older male named Darrow. His blowhole released a tired-sounding puff. He clicked at Lyra, a quick, troubled pattern. Something is wrong. The lagoon is sick. Lyra responded with a long, wavering click. She dove again, Darrow following close behind. Together they swam toward the center of the lagoon, weaving through murky patches. The deeper they went, the darker the water became, but not colder, never colder. It grew warmer with each meter. Too warm. Lyra's muscles twitched with discomfort. Dolphins could handle warm water, but this temperature belonged to shallow summer pools, not shaded lagoons at dawn. Then she saw it. A thick layer of brown-green water sat suspended over the deeper blue, refusing to mix. The layer quivered like gelatin. Darrow bumped into it, and instead of blending, it bent around him, holding shape for a moment before slowly swirling away. The lagoon was stratifying. Heat below, heat above, no circulation. Lyra clicked again. No response from the deeper layer. Sound couldn't penetrate the thermal boundary. That frightened her more than anything. She angled upward sharply, breaking the surface near a cluster of human boats. The researchers were still there, only now they were frantic. One man held a device showing a row of red bars. Another was on the radio again, his voice shaking. Oxygen levels are collapsing. If the tide doesn't return soon, the lagoon will flip. We need immediate intervention. A woman in a blue jacket leaned over the side, lowering a long tube into the water. When she pulled it up, the lower end was coated in brown sludge. She shook her head, horrified. Deep anoxia! The bottom is suffocating. Lyra didn't understand their words, but she understood reactions. Fear, urgency, desperation. Darrow nudged her side and dove again. She followed, weaving around the last patches of clear water. Deeper now, darker, warmer. Lyra tried to call again, and heard nothing return. Her sound was swallowed by the murk. The deeper layer was a dead zone. She and Darrow rose quickly. Too quickly. They had to surface, gasping air. Other dolphins had arrived, 3 from the outer ocean, circling uncertainly at the now closed entrance. They clicked nervously, swimming back and forth along the sediment wall. One rammed the ridge with his snout and recoiled when it didn't budge. Another slapped it with his tail. Nothing. The sea was sealed. Lyra dove again toward the ridge. She needed to understand it better. She scanned along its surface until she found something new. A thin fissure in the seafloor, trailing outward from the ridge like a crack in old pottery. She clicked at it. The return was strange. Deep, hollow, shifting. Another tremor pulsed through the ground. The fissure widened. A small puff of silt burst outward. Then another. Gas bubbles rose, slow, fat, and shimmering. Not many, but deadly in implication. Something beneath the seafloor was releasing pressure. Lyra retreated instinctively. The ridge pulsed minutely, so small the humans wouldn't see it, but she felt it through the bones in her jaw. The strait wasn't just blocked, it was rising, growing, expanding, becoming denser. Lyra surfaced again and scanned the lagoon. More fish floated belly up now. Birds circled low, confused. The heat was rising. Darrow surfaced beside her, exhaling loudly. His clicks trembled. If the tide does not return soon, Lyra already knew. The lagoon would die. Every creature inside it, trapped in a bowl that could no longer breathe, would suffer. She turned toward the sediment wall and dove with fierce determination. The ridge stretched across the entire strait like a wound. She swam along it, desperate for any breach, any tunnel, any channel of cool water. Nothing, no gap, no weakness. But she did feel something deeper. The ridge was not stable rock. It was shifting mud, a living, changing blockage. If pressure built beneath it, it might collapse suddenly, or rupture sideways, or worsen until the entire coastline shifted. She surfaced again, chest tight. The tide hadn't refused to return. It had been shut out. The ocean remained. The moon pulled, the tide pressed, but the strait had lost its path, and the lagoon had lost its lifeline. Lyra floated at the surface, staring into the restless lights of the human boats. They were scrambling now, deploying hoses, pumps, aerators, trying desperately to give the lagoon air it no longer had. And beneath her, the seafloor pulsed again. A warning. This was no temporary blockage. It was the beginning of a new landscape. and if the ridge continued to rise, the tide would not come back for a very long time.